Well, hey everybody, welcome back to another weekly video, whether it's on the boat or doing the grilling stuff. And today, we actually didn't post a video like we normally do every Saturday. I wanted to share a little bit about why that was. So today is actually Monday, August 16th. And I want to share that because it's important here. So 6 days ago, I had a stroke. I'm a little shocked at that. I'm 54 years old. I had a fucking stroke. Luckily, in the grand scheme of things, this was a really minor one. I didn't get paralyzed in one side of my body. Most of my thoughts are still with me, but certainly a lot of tests were run. And you know, it's always worth it to remind everybody of what a stroke is. And I'm sure I'm not going to get all the details of this perfectly right, but I'll at least get the gist of it. So a stroke is essentially a small blood clot that stops blood flow and oxygen to a portion of the brain. Depending on the size of that clot, as the arteries go up through your neck, you have two large ones in the sides of your neck. As they go up and they go into your brain, they continue to branch off. And this was a small enough clot that it wasn't until it got to one of those small little branches where it actually blocked oxygen and or blood from getting to that portion of the brain. In the grand scheme of things, I had a small portion of my brain that essentially died. 2.5 centimeters, I think, is the measurement. I need to validate that. It's the measurement. And that's essentially dead. It's gone. Now, what has to happen is the thoughts, the memories, the pieces of information that were stored in that bit of your brain, as you recall them, my brain will now need to find a new home, a new location, a storage spot for those particular thoughts. So yeah, completely crazy. I had a stroke. I'm 54 years old. That is shocking to me, and it's had me providing a lot of thoughts into, you know, what I'm doing with the rest of my life, and that kind of thing was really scary, candidly speaking. So let me talk a little bit about what happened and when it happened. So last Tuesday, I work from home most of the time. I was working from home, and I stopped to take lunch, went out in the living room with Deb, and we had some lunch and watched some TV. And I got done with that lunch, and I went back into my office, and I was struggling a little bit with some of my thoughts. It just didn't really strike me as all that important, just I was struggling with them. And I got on a call with one of my coworkers. We were preparing for a presentation we were doing with our bosses. And as I was talking to him, I really found myself having a difficult time remembering details. Some of my employees' names, things like that. And it concerned me a little bit. And I said to him, you know, like, hey, I just don't feel like memories are coming back. Let me go take a walk outside. I'll be back on the call here in, you know, top of the hour or whatever it was. And I walked outside, and I kind of wandered around the backyard for a few minutes, and it felt okay, but I was struggling to remember things. I was trying to remember my employees' names, and they weren't just readily coming to mind. I was trying to think of things that happened a year ago or 5 years ago, and some were right on the cusp of when I'd think about the question, I'd know the answer. Other ones, I had to think about it for a minute. So really, really odd behavior. And I went into the call, and I jumped on, and you know, my coworker and I had already talked about this. I said, if I feel like I'm stumbling a little bit, I'll stop and you take over. He's like, yeah, no problem. We did that, and we finished the call, and I called him back, and he's like, yeah, everything seemed fine. But during that call, it didn't seem fine to me. I was struggling to remember some details, and a couple of things that I would decide I was going to talk about, I would purposely change the direction a little bit because I just didn't feel like those facts weren't readily available. And I thought, well, you know, let me just kind of go through the day and see how it is. And, you know, I had a couple more calls later that day, but nothing that required a lot of deep, intense thought, if you will. So I decided I would just let it go, and, you know, sitting down watching TV and doing things that didn't require deep thinking didn't seem impacted at all. So I went to bed that night. The next morning, got up, and you know, Deb and I drove, and we took the little one to the bus stop, and then we ran up and got some coffee at Starbucks, and I said, you know, I'm still struggling with some of my memories. I think I'm going to go up to the ER and just take a look and see what's happening. And I had a call at 9 or 9:30 that morning. My plan was to go afterwards. And Deb's like, look, why don't you just go now? Like, there's no sense in waiting. There's probably not as long a line. So I'm like, all right, yeah, I'll do that. So I went up to the hospital at 7 o'clock, 7:15 in the morning or so on Wednesday last week. And when I told them what was going on, they checked me in immediately and began running, you know, chest x-rays and an MRI. And they were essentially checking to see if I had a stroke or a heart attack. And, you know, shocking to find out a few hours into it, after doing an MRI of the brain, that's absolutely what happened. I had a stroke. It blocked a a small blood vessel going into the brain. I think it was about 2 to 2.5 centimeters in size. That's about the size of the amount of brain that was impacted. It was, I'll get the name wrong, so I'll share that in a future video, but it was deep sort of in the center of the brain, not on one side or the other, but deep in the center of it. And they can see that that part of the brain essentially died off, right? Like lack of oxygen, lack of blood. Now, what's interesting is, and this is a lesson learned, I didn't do something right here. If you have something like this, they have between up to 2 to 3 hours to do something about it. So in the first 2 to 3 hours is a critical point in time. I should have gone to the hospital as soon as I noticed something was wrong. Had they been able to do that, they might have been able to break that blood vessel up or break up that clot and essentially restore flow back to the brain in that area. And because more time went by, they're not able to. That's essentially a little voided spot in my brain at this stage. So the good news is, because it was minor, because I don't have blockages other places, right? They think that this was just sort of a one-off, but we got to do way more tests to make sure we know this. They sort of expect that the brain is a miraculous device. And as I think through things, as I come up with those answers, those things that are missing, the idea is they will relocate to a different part of the brain. Great news. That could take some period of time, couple months, whatever it could possibly take. And I am noticing, now it is Monday the 15th, so I am noticing 4 or 5 days later that as I come up with thoughts, as I struggle to remember things, and I do, they are then readily recallable after that. So I guess the brain, amazingly enough, finds a new place to locate them and stores them in a place that's accessible. And ideally, all those thoughts will come back, and everything will be hunky dory. But my gosh, a f***ing stroke at 54 years old, a relatively healthy guy. I've been doing a ton of thinking, as you can probably imagine. And yeah, it's mind-blowing. It's crazy to think. So a couple of things. I was in the hospital for 3 days. Most of that was preventative, right? There wasn't anything they could do. They could see within the first couple of hours that I did have one. They then put, I've got a little monitor on me that's checking my heart rate and essentially doing a remote EKG. That's continuing to run to make sure there's no issue there. I'm going to have a follow-up with a cardiologist, right, and with a neurologist to make sure everything's good, and we'll take whatever preventative steps there are there to make sure we know if anything like this could potentially happen again, or if this was a one-off. But my gosh, scary stuff, and this is the first time we actually missed a video. I thought I would share this with you because there were a few things that came out of this that were impactful and meaningful for me, and that was, you have from 0 to 2 to 3 hours of time for them to actively do something if you are having some kind of an event like this. So I now know if I'm ever in this place where my thoughts aren't coming to me and I recognize that it's different than a normal behavior, I'm going to the ER. I'm not waiting. Thankfully, this was a small clot. And if you think about what happens is they believe it was a clot, probably formed somewhere in these arteries that go up the neck. A small clot broke off into the blood vessel, and as those blood vessels go up into the brain, they laid up into the brain, and then they splinter off into smaller vessels and smaller vessels and smaller vessels. And it wasn't until it got to one of those smaller vessels that the size of this blockage actually stopped the flow of blood to that section. Lucky for me, that was a small section, which is why I didn't have losing the right side of my body or the left side of my body, or seeing the drooping face, or losing motion in the left or right side of the body. So that's a really positive thing, but that's also the first one, and you never know if another one could happen. So all these tests that I'm going to have done are the right thing to do. It's amazing what something like this does to you. Let's forget about the physical things that happen from the event itself. But my gosh, my brain has been reeling. It has just been going nuts. And it doesn't help that the first 3 days we're in the hospital and there's nothing to do short of picking up your phone and scrolling Facebook or something. You really are bored. So your brain just starts going nuts on you. And it's had me doing a lot of thinking, right? You start evaluating a lot of parts of your life. And, luckily, the timing of this worked pretty well. I mean, sadly, we missed Deb's brother's funeral. We really wanted to be there. She stayed here with me because I was still in the ER. Whitney and the girls did go, so they are coming back tomorrow. Right now, I just want to get back to doing my regular job, doing it effectively. What's interesting though is I was just on an internal call with one of my coworkers, and as I'm thinking through things, I'm realizing not everything is instantly recallable. I have to give it a little bit of thought. And I'm probably going to have to go through that for a few weeks or maybe even a couple of months while everything gets back to the way it should be. It's a really uncomfortable position to be in, to not have your thoughts instantly come back to you for things you know that you should know. Things you know you remembered a week ago, but don't today. So I guess in the end, one, this is an explanation to talk about why we didn't actually upload a video and to be real with you and share some real world experiences going on. The other reason for this video is to make sure that everybody here knows if you have some kind of an event like this where things just don't feel right, where you're not recalling certain parts of your memory, even if everything else is physically fine, go get checked out. Go get checked out. I don't know if mine would have been different or not, but the reality is because I waited 15, 16 hours before I went to the hospital, there was nothing they can do about that section of my brain. That section of my brain sort of died off. And it's gone. The good news is there's plenty of other places to store things, but that little section, yeah, it's not there. And wow, you think about it very differently once it's occurred to you versus not having it occurred to you. If I were just telling you this and it hasn't occurred to you, you probably have a very different thought about that whole thing than I have in my head right now. So if anything, my encouragement to you is if you have something like that, go to the hospital. What's the worst case? You're out a few $100 or whatever the heck your part of the non-insurance covered deductible is. Go have it looked at, have it checked out. I'm glad I'm more educated today, and I'm more educated without having lost a side of my body and my memory, right? Like that's a stroke could have been significantly worse, and in my case it was really minor. I apologize, this video isn't like, hey, let's make something cool on the grill or let's go do some work on the sailboat. This is real time, real world. This is what's happened to me kind of thing, and I wanted to share it with you. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative. Please do share it with somebody else. This is a real world example, and the more people that know that we're just saying, I feel fine, let's see what happens tomorrow. In hindsight, that was stupid on my part. Just stupid. And don't make that same mistake. Let this be a lesson for you about how to look at these things and view them as serious or serious impacting, so that you take a look at them and make sure that you know whether or not it's impacting you. So again, thank you so much for watching this. Again, this really is all about me giving a little bit of guidance and a little bit of sharing what I wish I'd have done differently. And I hope if you're watching this, you don't do what I did, because at the end of the day, I'm 54 years old and I had a fucking stroke. And not only did I have the stroke, I didn't take the right steps in the beginning. So don't do what I did. Just don't. Make sure if you don't feel right, you go to the hospital. Be out the few $100 it's going to cost you, because my gosh, all of a sudden that feels like pennies. It's not even something to consider in the grand scheme of things. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll see you next week when we will have a new video. We will be recording these on a regular basis, so we'll see what we decide to fire up in the smoker and get cooking. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one. Bye now.